I'll tell them in terms of superpowers.
Yeah.
Richard Pryor for his vulnerability.
Okay.
Chris Rock for his argumentation.
Yeah.
Cat Williams for his physicality and freedom in performance. Michelle Wolf for her joke structure. Mike Birbiglia for his timing, pacing, and how tight he puts his storytelling, the basket weave. Chappelle for his candor. And Jon Stewart for his decency. Those are my favorites.
Okay.
That have had the biggest impact on me.
I'm John Heilman, and this week on Hell and High Water, I talk with comedian, writer, political commentator, and rock star for A New Brown America, Hasan Minhaj, star of the two-time Peabody Award-winning Netflix show Patriot Act with Hasan Minhaj, and the acclaimed one-man shows Homecoming King and The King's Jester, the latter of which coming to you soon on Netflix. We talk about Hasan growing up Muslim in Davis, California, and coming of age in George W. Bush's America as a son of first-generation immigrants, how being a debate kid changed his life and jump-started his comedy career, his successful stint as a correspondent for The Daily Show and what he learned from both Jon Stewart and Trevor Noah, his evolution as a writer of political comedy, and his pivot to longer-form storytelling and bearing intimate details from his personal life. The impact that Hasan had bringing the issue of student loan debt to the forefront and his audacious approach to testifying before Congress, his experience as host of the White House Correspondents' Dinner, and how his willingness to push the envelope on certain topics put his marriage and his family at risk. And Hasan lists his all-time favorite comedians and explains what makes them unique. You will not want to miss a single second of this.
I traveled through the Midwest, like doing all these colleges, and I was driving through Missouri, and I see like a lot of religious fervor there. I saw this pro-life billboard on the side of the road, right? It had a picture of a baby on it, right? And it said, "This baby would have cured cancer, but someone aborted it." And it's like, ugh. That's kind of dark, right? And what's the likelihood that that specific baby would have grown up to cure cancer? That's a lot of expectation to put on one baby. I wish they had like a billboard showing the other side of the argument, right? Like, this baby would have grown up to be a serial killer, but someone aborted it. Good job, Mom. Way to come through in the clutch. Like that is a lot better.
Okay.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, I thought it's halfway decent.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you what you thought of. First of all, fashion. You're okay with that, right?
I think, gray hoodie and I guess.
I mean, it's not embarrassing.
Yeah,
I've seen a few older clips that don't look quite as.
Right. You could have played Evening at the Improv or
things like that.
Stuff that
you look okay there. You're young. You're young, but you look all right.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking about it because when I came across it, I wanted to talk. Before I talk about anything else, I just want to talk about this. For a while with first the Daily Show and then with Patriot Act, you were in the middle of topical political conversations all the time and making comedy about that, right?
Yeah.
The thing that happened last week is such a big thing. I think in my history of covering politics, 30 years, I've never seen a bigger single scoop than a leaked signed Supreme Court opinion.
Yes.
It's never happened before. There have been more impactful things. You could say all of Woodward and Bernstein's books leading up to news breaks leading up to Watergate. But as a single scoop, reporters thought that was an unattainable thing. And along with Brown v. Board, one of the two most famous Supreme Court decisions that most Americans actually know what it is, right?
How would you classify what happened? Is that technically whistleblowing, a leaked document?
Well, we don't know. We don't know though. Nobody knows. I mean, at this stage, not knowing who the source of it, maybe we'll never know. But not knowing what the source of their intention was, it could be, it depends on what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
There's plausible theories about a conservative clerk who's trying to apply pressure to keep all five of the conservatives on board. There's theories about liberal clerks who are trying to alert the public that a disaster was coming. Yeah. It kind of depends, and I think the intentionality will determine, if we ever know, would determine how you would call it. But it's a giant thing, right? And totally. Everyone in America is talking about it, right?
Yes.
So at that moment, do you miss having a platform where you're able to just be making comedy about a very topical, huge political news story where I'm sure you have plenty of thoughts and things to say? Do you miss it?
And it's one of those things where there'd be so many stories we'd be sitting on for quite a bit of time where it just is missing that last, but why is this relevant or important now?
What's the peg?
Exactly.
Right.
What's the peg?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I remember, funny enough, you're friends with a mutual friend who was a showrunner for some time at Patriot Act, Steve Bodo. Steve Bodo had a pitch in one of the later seasons of Patriot Act on Trump and civil rights.
Right.
This would have been such a great, the rolling back of certain civil rights and civil liberties.
Yeah.
And you're always waiting for that, for better or for worse, why should I care about this right now? Because there's so many sort of existential threats that exist on the horizon, climate, et cetera. what happened just this past week is a prime example of that. We would be sitting on already 17, 18 minutes of a script and being like, yep, that's our top of the show. And then let's dive into the sort of deeper information dive.
Right, so you really would have, at that, for Patriot Act, you would have had like,
Yes.
like B matter, basically. In the
Yes.
newspaper business, we call it B matter. You're waiting for a lead,
Yeah.
but you'll have basically, or an obit. It's like when your obit's written and it's
Right,
like, it's
right.
waiting for cause of death.
Now, funny enough, that clip that you just played from 2009, holy shit.
Yeah.
That would have been something that I would have pitched as an Act 1 or Act 2 chat on The Daily Show.
Right.
So
Right.
Trevor or John, at the time, we would do probably like an Act 1, 7.5 minute sort of analysis. Here's what happened. And generally then in an Act 2 or the tail end of an Act 1, he would throw to a correspondent.
Right.
And my comedic take there would be like, well, should every baby be alive, or whatever my sort of satirical
Yeah.
wink wink take is,
yeah.
that then lets us land with then a more poignant, salient sort of argument where John or Trevor's playing the straight man, and then I get to kind of be the satirical, goofy nitwit.
So there's one answer to that question, which is sort of like, oh yeah, if I think about it, it would have been cool if this story happened when I was doing those things.
Yes.
There's another like slightly different version of the question and answer, which is, do you miss it? Like, do you wake up at home in Greenwich, Connecticut and go, fuck, I really wish I had a place to go talk about this? Or do you basically go like, I'm kind of out of that business now. I obviously still care about politics, but
Yes
I
and
don't
no.
miss the platform.
Yeah, yes and no. So here's what like deeply kind of disappoints me, and where I feel a deep sense of disillusionment. And I'd love your take on this and the work you're currently doing. Something that's so deeply frustrating is, it's funny that you said, this is one of the biggest stories and everyone's talking about it. Yes, and what's also taking up 50 to 60% of the discourse is Dave Chappelle getting tackled at the Hollywood Bowl. Right. Like those two having equal amount of airspace in the sort of Twitter news feed or the sort of cultural zeitgeist and milieu is kind of disappointing. And so it's part of that makes me feel like, yeah, I don't miss also being entrenched in other culture war issues that I don't care about. I like doing the kind of deep, meaningful work that I'm getting to do with King's Jester and other projects that I'm working on.
Yeah, and you also.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, and at the same time, you would also. I mean, the Chappelle thing even seems serious compared to Olivia Wilde or whatever her name is getting served getting served paternity or custody papers by Jason Sudeikis at Comic-Con or whatever. You're like, really? Like that's when I open up my Google search, it's like Roe v. Wade being struck down, Dave Chappelle being attacked, and a Netflix thing, and
is this appropriate?
And a broken up couple embarrassing each other with their custody papers. It's like a little fucked up.
And it becomes this, Rorschach test where the event itself, I don't think is wildly impactful on a lot of people's lives, and yet it becomes this larger Rorschach test about, I guess in the case of the Olivia Wilde thing, of just like power dynamics, relationships. What's Jason Sudeikis like? What is Olivia Wilde like? Analysis of her relationship with Harry Styles. It's all these things that I'm just candidly, I don't really care for, but I would get inadvertently pulled into it. We'd have to do a joke to come, some topical joke to get into a story. It's stuff like that where I'm like, yeah, I don't miss this part of it, but I do miss moments like that to have a deep, meaningful kind of conversation through comedy.
So it's funny because like on a thing like SCOTUS, right? So like we get, when this thing happened last week.
Yeah.
You get scolded sometimes by people because you're like, well, trying to figure out the question of like what are the theories about why it was leaked? What were they trying to accomplish? What's going on here, right?
Yeah.
And people say, don't forget about that. It's going to impact the lives of millions of women. To which I say, well, yes, that's 100% true, and we should cover it that way.
Yeah.
What does this mean for women in America? But we can also have another discussion about the power dynamics of the court. I think you can do both those things as long as you're appropriate about it. I mean, when I think about people who did the way you did what you did when you were at Daily Show in one form and then at Patriot Act in a different form, you were doing a mix of analysis, commentary, and comedy all kind of rolled up into one at that place, right?
Yeah.
This, what we just played, is just very early stand-up.
Yeah.
But it's still abortion, which is hard to make anything funny about it.
Yeah.
It's hard. So how would you think about that? Like in any of those roles, this is a big thing. Everyone's talking about it right now.
Right.
But I'm basically a comedian. I'm other things maybe, but at heart, I want to make people laugh. Right.
Yeah.
So how do you think about a really tough issue like abortion and think, here's how we could go at it and make it funny?
I think one of the best exercises that I was given later in my career by this amazing stage director named Greg Wallach. He directed my first special, Homecoming King.
Yeah.
And that kind of was my first claim to fame, so to speak, in the stand-up touring storytelling space. But he gave me this exercise whenever we would work through the show and we would trim it down. How does this make you think and how does it make you feel?
Yeah.
What are you thinking right now and how does it make you feel? And I think some of my best jokes, that's the starting point. And if I can really break that down in a new, clever, innovative way, those are my favorite types of jokes. There's a comic right now, I don't know if you've seen her work, I really love her work, Taylor Tomlinson.
No.
She's just whip smart, so funny. Have you seen her work? She's so hilarious. Watch her special on Netflix.
Yeah.
What I love about Taylor's work is she is covering topics that I've heard a million different takes on, but the way it makes her think and feel, she's talking about it in a whole new way.
Yeah.
It's the thing we all felt when we saw Gaffigan in some of his breakthrough.
Right. Yeah.
It was like, oh, Hot Pockets and food and McDonald's French fries, they've been here for decades, and a very long time.
Yeah.
And he found a new way to talk about food in a really interesting, innovative way. But what Taylor's doing with mental health or therapy and just all these new spaces that I've heard a ton of takes on, the way she talks about the way she thinks about it and the way it makes it feel, her feel is really innovative and new and interesting. So it's with difficult topics like that, yeah, I'm always, the first thing I'm going is, what do I feel about this right now?
Yeah.
And it's a very just personal, that's what I love most about comedy, that active introspection. Something's sitting with me here. How do I feel this way? Why do I feel this way about it? I have to get that out.
It's funny because when Berbiglio was here, we were talking about Tig Notaro and her breast cancer thing, which is kind of in that same zone of, so like hard to do a comedy act about about having breast cancer, and she just goes there. It's like and somehow like the high wire act quality of that, which I think is true with a thing like abortion. If you're a dude, in this world we live in now, you don't have full-scale permission to talk about it, and this is where the two things come together, the cancel culture stuff. It's like you're like, how do I do something that's brave and interesting and new?
Right.
But now there's all these tripwires all over the place. We'll talk about this more later. But do you like on a topic like that? Would that be something that you would be like, you know what? This is not going to be worth the fucking trouble. There are things like this in my life as doing political commentary where I go, I'm never going to be able to explain myself adequately. If over dinner I explained the nuance of my thing with my friends, they would go, oh, I totally get it. But on a cable hit, let alone Twitter, I can't talk about this without in a way that's going to be adequate to it. And so I'm just like, it's not going to be worth the trouble.
I think I hear what you're saying, and one of the things I feel right now is that we're drowning in opinion in Twitter and Twitter commentary, in the speed at which everyone is pumping out takes and short form premise punchline kind of quippy takes on every topic. I would rather focus my energy, if I don't have a show like that, focus it on storytelling.
Right, sure.
And storytelling allows me to talk about something with a level of sincerity and authenticity. It may not be as like trendy and hot in the moment, but I do think it allows the listener and the viewer to go, he's speaking from a real place.
Yes.
And so at least he's being authentic and genuine.
Yeah.
That to me is a little bit more interesting if I don't have a show. Now Trevor, he has to carry that. Stephen, Samantha B, they have to carry that. How are we going to talk about this? Given the premise and the sort of expectation they have with their audience through the show.
Which is that you can't not talk about it.
You can't not talk about it.
And you also know it's super dangerous. I know Berbiglio was like, hey, that's the job, that's who you signed up for, don't whine about it. And I think obviously that's the right thing, especially with a lot of people who are making a ton of money to do that. It's like, well, that's the risk you got. You're not breaking rocks in the hot sun, so man up or lady up and do it. But it's tricky. So here, I want to play this thing. You did an interview, just the last thing on abortion, because it raises this issue about another thing that artists have to contend with. You did this interview with Alana Glazer a couple years ago, May 2019.
Wow.
And she says in this interview, she said that Georgia had just passed a newly restrictive law, and she was supposed to be making a movie in Georgia, and she said, I'm not going to make that movie now. I'm not going to make it there. We're going to move it someplace else. And you, who were interviewing her, she was really talking, and all of a sudden you kind of weighed in. And when she said this thing about how she wouldn't now make the movie in Atlanta, you had a different opinion. So I want to play that and we'll talk about it.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I know the NBA very actively with the bathroom bill stuff was just like, hey, we're not gonna participate, or we're not gonna endorse this.
That is so cool.
Yeah, Adam Silver's a great commissioner. Eddie, didn't Adam Silver do that? Remember when the bathroom bill happened? It was in North Carolina, right? The All-Star game, right? And they threatened to pull the All-Star game.
That is so
Yeah,
cool.
and so they ended up delaying it, right? Adam, as the commissioner, was like, hey, we don't stand for this. But I've oftentimes thought, as artists, do we just bring the work there? Do we try to change the culture there from, because I know there's people on the ground that would like want us to be there. That would be like, I would love for Ilana Glazer to be there. I would love for Hasan Minhaj to come shoot his show there. It would, you know what I mean? It could be like a lightning rod moment. So I'm caught between this thing.
Oh, wow.
So as you sit here today, like,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, you've just been on tour for how? I mean, you're still kind of on tour.
Yeah, I
in a
mean,
way.
we have our last few dates. We're closing it out now.
You
yeah.
started when?
September.
September. How many dates have you done?
100 plus. I
Okay.
mean, shows?
So,
yeah.
and a lot of shows all over the country, right?
Yes.
So, you know, have you resolved because there you're ambivalent. You're kind of
Yeah.
like, I can see the argument in either direction.
Sure.
And then you didn't come to conclusion. As you
Yes.
sit here today, if in the wake of the repeal of Roe v. Wade, if there's there will be states, a lot of them, if it's fully repealed, that will they're like, full abortion ban. Like, do you take the next tour there or not?
Right. Oh, that's really interesting. You know, somebody who shaped my perspective on this, and I always turn to people who have more wisdom and lived experience than me. I was talking to Trevor Noah about this, and Trevor was the one who expanded my worldview on this. Funny enough, outside of domestic politics, the question I had for him is, should I go perform in the Middle East? I had been poking a lot of, it's a thing I talk about in The King's Jester, but I also on Patriot Act, made fun of, Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Crown Prince.
It's like more than made fun of. Poured scathing hot battery acid on. Yes.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was asking him is, he, the Crown Prince, through this thing called Vision 2030, is really trying to bring a lot of artists to the Middle East, specifically Saudi Arabia and Riyadh, to perform. Swiss Beats, musical artists, hip hop artists, comedians, they are really trying to change the face and their image around the world. I go, Trevor, what should I do? And he presented an interesting question, and he said, well, to what extent is your performance a reflection and an endorsement of the government? And to what extent is your performance a desire to connect to the civilian population that don't get to choose the rules and the sort of the society, the current society that they live in?
Yeah.
And this becomes a very complicated question. Do I perform in China? I want to perform in China. But as a Muslim, do I do that? Knowing that there's over 2 million Uyghur Muslims that are just currently in re-education camps, as we like to call them.
Yeah.
It's a super complicated, question. And that's what I was presenting to Ilana. I don't know. It's so tricky.
Yeah.
Because there's, again, lightning rod moments where someone like Adam Silver tells Charlotte, hey, we're not going to do the All-Star game
Right.
here if you keep doing this.
Well,
this is a reflection on the state and the state leadership.
Yeah.
Or you could also say, are you punishing the fans? Are you punishing the people of Charlotte? Right? It's really complicated.
I mean, I just think about it from the context of, Trevor makes me think about it, although other things would too. But, this was the debate, in South Africa pre the fall of apartheid, which was, a lot of people went and played Sun City for a long time.
Yeah.
Musical acts went and played Sun City.
Yes.
And then finally there was, Little Steven and a bunch of people said, this is not helping this government to fall. We want to help this government to fall, and the only way to do that is to not have any kind of constructive engagement. Be part of an economic boycott, bring the government down.
Yes.
And that, in fact, is part of what happened.
Yes.
So it's like, I don't know that there's any perfect precedent that you would say, this is the thing. I mean, a systematized, I can't think of anything maybe more blatant than the system of apartheid in South Africa, and trying to bring that a whole slave nation, where the majority are enslaved by the white minority.
Yes.
That's a wild fucking thing. So you can make an argument that's so extreme.
And I think the mistake that gets made sometimes, whether it's apartheid or there's also been a boycott with performing in Tel Aviv and Israel,
right?
And believe it or not, there were particular boycotts and conversations. And already you can tell these are apples and oranges. We go from South Africa to Tel Aviv in Israel to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia. Early in September, in the early parts of my tour, there was even discussions in regards to not performing in states that will not have mask mandates.
Yeah. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So that also was on the table, and artists were having conversations kind of via iMessage and WhatsApp of like, should we do it? Should we not? These were real conversations. But you can see in each of these 4 buckets that I just mentioned, the circumstances are
different.
so unique and different, and you can't say they're the same in all of them. But it's really interesting to see how things will unfold. What's happening right now, specifically with abortion, is so reprehensible in terms of civil liberties and civil rights. I'm really interested to see how this unfolds.
Yeah.
And whatever pressure that can be applied, I think those options are worth considering and weighing out.
Did you, just because you raised it, did the questions around masking and policy around masking have any effect on where you ended up going on the tour?
Yeah, so you'll notice there were certain places where if they did not have a mask mandate,
Yeah.
and again, I'm very privileged and lucky that I have the leverage to do this
Sure.
because I was able to hold sold out shows over the promoter's head. If you don't have a mask mandate or a vaccine mandate, I just won't perform until you do.
Right.
So we were able to get certain states like South Carolina and Florida to play ball. And so that to me is an example of a small amount of pressure in regards to a public health and safety issue. But after I saw some of the early tours that were going out before me, folks were getting COVID, artists were getting COVID, some people in the crowd were. In that early fall run, I definitely leveraged that as much as I possibly could.
I want to ask you one more thing that's sort of topical before I do a little deeper dive here.
Sure.
But it goes again to this thing of like how there's an overarching theme here, like how you've evolved as a person in the world. And when I think about the abortion thing, another way in which an unusual thing happened to you because of your engagement with the public issue was on the student debt thing. So I want to play the Patriot Act piece from that, a little chunk of that, and then what happened because of it, and then we'll talk about that. So let's play that one, number 3.
Student loan debt. It affects pretty much everyone I know. And if you're one of the 10 people it doesn't affect, congratulations on being a Kennedy. Student loans are crippling millions of people, many of them fresh out of college. Imagine starting a race, and then the guy with the starter pistol uses the gun to shoot you in the leg. The student debt crisis is so big, there's even a game show to help people with their loans.
Welcome to Paid Off. This is the game show dedicated to helping you pay off your student loans. For each correct answer, we'll pay you a percentage of your debt. If you get 8 correct, we'll pay you the whole amount.
This is a real show. They turned a national crisis into a game show. I can't wait to see how Howie Mandel solves the opioid epidemic. The best part of Paid Off is the tagline.
I know it's not everything, but I hope that helps take off the pressure for a little bit. I know it's not everything, but I hope it takes the pressure off for a little bit.
That's not a tagline. That's what a plastic surgeon says to someone after a chimp attack. I know it's not everything, but I hope it helps take off the pressure for a little bit. Now get out there and start dating, Scarface.
So it's like that thing, you know,
That was a pretty shout out to the archival team. That's a great SOT to open with.
I mean, we have young people here all who have a lot of student debt.
Yeah.
I gotta play that one. I mean, when you all the things, I could think of things that you did in Patriot Act that were more controversial, and we'll talk about Khashoggi and Saudi Arabia. That's one example, and you talk about it in King's Gesture. King's Gesture, the ramifications and the calculuses in doing the news industry thing with Alden Capital. Right? Was there anything that had more of a resonance among your audience than that?
No, this was probably the deepest.
Right.
I would say the deepest resonating in terms of, again, scale. Like the sheer number of people that I know in my life, and specifically for my generation, that are just hobbled by that.
Yeah. And so, like, what did that look like? What did the resonance look like? Like, the social media reaction, people coming up to you on the street, like, what, like, how do you know on a show like that when something like that really breaks through?
You can kind of feel, and you know this when you're walking around New York, just the way, especially when you work in media and the type of show, whether it's Daily Show, Patriot Act, SNL, you can tell when something really penetrated. Yeah. People would just grab me in the street and go, "Fuck Navient," and I'm like, "Yeah, I know." And then just like, income-based repayment plan. I'm like, I'm telling you, yes, don't defer your payments. It's stuff like that where people, social media, but also coming up to you just being like, hey, thank you for doing that.
And did that come from your personal, was that autobiographical, at least in root? Could you identify with that?
Well,
like you had a lot of student debts?
I lucked out, so I didn't because I went to UC Davis. So I went to a local school and I lived at home, funny enough.
Yes.
So I didn't have crippling student loan debt, but I had crippling emotional debt. That being said, I have so many friends, my sister, my brother-in-law, that it's just like, it's
everywhere.
It's financial HPV. Everybody kind of has it, and nobody's really talking about it.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I've used that language.
No, I just thought of it right now. But,
okay, so then you get called to Congress.
Yes.
And I want to show that just because, again, not that many comedians get to go to Capitol Hill to get to testify. So let's play that.
Right.
My name is Hasan Minhaj. I'm a Muslim, and I condemn radical Islamic terrorism. That has nothing to do with anything. I just want that on the record. It's good to get ahead of these things.
Now, Chairwoman Waters invited me here today because I host a political comedy show on Netflix called Patriot Act, which means I may owe some of you guys royalties. Just DM, we can talk later. Now, we recently did an episode on the student loan crisis, and it really hit home with our audience because 44 million Americans owe more than $1.6 trillion of student loan debt. In fact, the day we shot our episode, we polled our studio audience. It was only about 200 people. In that room alone, had over $6 million of student loan debt. Now, granted, our audience is mainly unemployed poli-sci majors, but that's still a lot of money.
Tough room.
Very tough room. I bombed so bad. It was really rough.
I gotta say,
Yeah.
I watched the whole thing, and you made powerful points on the policy issues.
Yeah.
The comedy
but
did.
the jokes were airballs.
I gotta say, if you'd called someone who'd spent a amount of time in congressional hearings, I would have been like, don't do that, Hasan. It's like, you're not gonna get the laughs.
Yeah.
People's like, is he real? 6 million? Really? 6 million?
Yeah.
What was that experience like?
You know what's funny? So maybe it's the comic in me. There is something very titillating about doing that, about airballing.
Yes.
As a comedian, committing to the bit and going there and not breaking, that actually was the test for me of like, hey, just can you do the whole testimony without breaking? And that is very funny to me.
Right.
I mean, when you watch, a huge, inspiring performance for me was Colbert's, I believe it was the 2004 White House Correspondents' Dinner speech.
Yeah.
But he just commits the full set.
Yes.
And I remember talking to Steven for advice before I hosted in 2017. And yeah, he was just like, commit. You're not playing to the room.
Yeah, right.
You're playing to everybody at
Yes,
home.
right,
And so, I realized, okay, eventually someone's going to clip this out from C-SPAN 3 and put it on YouTube.
On YouTube,
or something.
people will laugh.
Yeah, and it will,
Yeah.
and it will resonate.
Yeah.
Both the satire and the sincerity of it will both resonate.
It's hard to
but
bomb in the room, though. It's
But
hard
in
to
the room,
bomb
it's
in the room.
tough. Yeah.
And I can't help but think that, I've done enough public speeches where I have my little tiny attempts at humor.
Yeah.
And when people don't laugh at the first one, I'm self-editing as I go through. I'm like, I'm not going to make that joke and that joke and that joke because they're not going to get it. This room is your instinct is maybe I should just start to change, but you're fuck it, I got to stay on this.
I think I've been, I'm lucky enough to do it. I've been doing comedy long enough where I'm still a Padawan, but I've gotten to see the Jedis up close. And the best comics, this is a weird thing, the comics that I love the most truly do not give a fuck. They really don't care. Right. And my buddy Prashant, who's the director of The King's Jester, tells me this all the time. Sometimes when he goes, you're talking too fast, he'll give me this note during performances.
Yes.
He goes, let them come to you. You don't have to impart your will on them. Let them come to you. And the longer you sit in it, they will come to you. So even later during the question and answer session, the little Uzi Vert references and all those things, I was very clear to go, no, I'm going to stay the course and stay in character and not capitulate, not fold. Let them come to you.
You just said a thing that I had to, because here you say things and comics you love the most.
Yeah.
Who are the comics you love the most?
I mean, this is just the all time.
If you put it on the table, I'm going to go there. It's a terrible question to ask
Yeah,
somebody. If I would, there's a reason why the words "my favorite albums" never come out of my mouth because as soon as you say it, they go, "Well, what are your favorite albums?" I'm like, "Oh, fuck it, I can't." Answer that
so I'll tell them in terms of superpowers.
Yeah.
Richard Pryor for his vulnerability.
Okay.
Chris Rock for his argumentation.
Yeah.
Cat Williams for his physicality and freedom in performance. Michelle Wolf for her joke structure. Mike Birbiglia for his timing, pacing, and how tight he puts his storytelling, the basket weave. Chappelle for his candor. And Jon Stewart for his decency. Those are my favorites.
Okay.
That have had the biggest impact on me.
That's something that even if you've never made that list exactly like that, you've thought about that though, because each one of them has you've had thought about what the superpowers were.
I'm a huge basketball fan, and one of the things I think about all the time is it's my favorite players have the most amount of tools in their Batman utility belt.
Right.
One of my favorite players to watch right now, he's not playing in the playoffs, was Kyrie.
Yeah, sure.
But if you look at Kyrie, speed, handling, body control, ability to hit shots in the paint, he's like an NBA 2K player. Circle, circle, spin, spin, X, 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 R1, R2, he's that. He has the most amount of tricks I've seen in his bag. Luka right now has an incredible amount of tricks in his bag. And so when I think about comedy that way, I'm like, what are the different tools that I would want to have in my bag.
Apparently, like there's not that we don't know this about athletes, but in Kyrie's case, all those things you just said are true. And then you're like, and how is it that someone has all those tools? The one tool he doesn't have is the brain power to like just go get a fucking shot, dude.
Yes.
And don't fucking,
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. You know who I was thinking about the other day because of Judd and the movie coming out, his Carlin movie, and like the thing about Carlin, for a lot my generation.
Sure.
It's just like it's not. I'm not a student of comedy the way you are. Like you think about this stuff in a very that's a very rigorous, deep way. I guess it's your thing. It's your art.
my life,
Of course,
yeah.
you think about it that way. I'm not surprised that that's the case. I think but a lot of us love comedy and don't think about it quite that way. But watching the trailer, where Colbert says he was the Beatles of comedy, and like it reminds me of how just big he was, and he was a political comic in a way. He did other stuff that wasn't political, but there was a pervasiveness to Carlin was everywhere, in the sense that like I said to one of these guys, I'm like, everybody I know could say shit, piss, fuck, cunt, cocksucker, motherfucker, tits, like that. Like they knew it, and their parents would get mad at them, but everybody could do it because he was like the atmosphere at that point. Supreme Court case, he was like a cultural, like you can't almost be that anymore.
Yeah.
There's no one like that anymore. That's that kind of much. I mean,
That's
maybe
so singular and stretching.
Well, it just because of the
way.
combination of where they intersect with like obscenity, his skills as a comic, the choice of topic, and then it getting elevated in a way where like the Supreme Court and all of the entire media and entertainment industry is waiting for the verdict. It's like, I don't know, and in a culture that's more of a monoculture back then, when stuff like that was on, you couldn't avoid it, you couldn't get away with it, you couldn't go hide in your little bubble where you were, your little gamer bubble where I don't care what's going on out there. I don't know. Do you think it's like? I guess Chappelle's sort of like that now.
I think there's believe it or not, I just think there's a lot of people doing a lot of important things, and it's interesting. During that period of time, you look at Carlin, Pryor, Cosby. There's Joan Rivers. There's probably maybe 10 comedians that are pushing culture that way.
Right.
If you look at the number of comedians that are touring at that level now, it's 20, 30, 40. Tom Segura, Nate Bargatze, I can list you so many names.
Yeah.
Bert Kreischer, guys that are doing arenas that you may have not heard of, or that a lot of people have heard of.
Yeah.
But we don't live in a monoculture anymore, but there are a lot of comedians, I think, stretching the genre in very unique, interesting ways. Bo Burnham is an example of someone who's stretching it in a certain way.
Yeah.
Alana Glazer, I can name so many different comics that are stretching culture in their own unique way. So that's what I'm most interested in.
Yeah, and I think I agree with what you just said. I think it's almost like it highlights the way in which my observation is it's more about like the world we live in now more than about them. It's not like I'm saying there aren't people who are as good as Carlin now. That's not my point. My point is to like
that
in
have
a way,
that level of attention and focus.
Nobody can. It's like why
Don't you feel that way with your industry? I mean, grew up Dan Rather.
Sure.
There was 3.
Like
Tom Brokaw.
No one gives a shit who's the anchor of the network evening news anymore.
Yeah.
With all due respect to whoever those people are. I can't even name the CBS evening news anchor right now. I guess it's Nora O'Donnell. No disrespect to Nora.
Yeah.
But it's like there's just not. They're not. We don't live in that culture anymore.
Yeah.
There used to be rock bands who, when the summer came, they would make a record that you would hear playing out of every car in Times Square with the window rolled down.
Right.
That doesn't happen anymore. It's like the whole culture's been shattered. It's a million little pieces around your feet, and it's like harder to move the culture.
Yes.
Not impossible, but harder to move the culture in a way that you could back in the early 70s or late 60s, whatever that was. And it's a challenge for someone because when you think about what you're doing, do you think I'm trying to tell jokes? I'm trying to tell stories. I'm trying to tell stories and jokes, or I'm trying to move the culture. Does that even cross your mind, or does that seem like totally, like I would never be quite that presumptuous to think I could move the culture?
Yeah, I think for me, it's just how far can I stretch myself, and how far can I push myself as a creative person, and hopefully the genre just a little bit. But if I, and it's funny, I talk about this in King's Jester. If I try to play the fame and clout game, that's a losing battle. Right. That's a losing battle. And I think as someone like yourself, through the work that you've done with the Showtime series, when you cover quite literally the circus show of politics and politicians that are cult of personality, to me, the professional wrestling aspect of that is very dangerous. I don't want to be and it's consumed me at times, and I don't want to play that game.
Yeah.
It is a losing battle.
So I'll play another old thing of yours that goes. It's not as old as the thing we played before, but play number 5. This thing talking about being Muslim in America from the Laugh Factory. I think around 2013 or so. Play this and then we can talk about why you decided to start doing this in the first place.
Wow. Okay.
I'm Muslim. Thank you. And I love board games. And I think the hardest thing about being Muslim is not being able to play Jenga on 9/11, you know what I mean? Because the last thing I can do is just cheer as buildings fall. Jenga! I look like a now. Some of you guys aren't laughing at that joke, and that's because you're wrong. Because I love my country. I love it. That's why every Thursday, I wear a God Bless America shirt because it's made in Pakistan. Now, our lives are inherently different, okay? There's certain things that you guys can enjoy, white people, that I can't, like going to the beach and running through sandcastles. I can't do that. It'll be like, Daddy, brown men destroyed our buildings. Never forget. That's my life forever. Do you get it?
I need to slow down.
You're fast then.
Yeah,
you were
I'm just
fast.
like.
But you're young. It's okay.
Yeah, I'm just.
But it's funny that like
material.
what did you? So you're. I mean, these are relatively early.
Early
right?
bits.
Like
yeah.
when did you say to yourself, I want to do comedy, and why?
I was a speech and debate kid.
Yes. I knew
So
a fucking dork.
Yeah.
And fast. Were you a 1 or a 2?
I was very fast. My event was impromptu. I don't know if you did impromptu.
Yeah, so I'm familiar with that too.
Yeah, so I was
Another generation. I was senior at Redlands, my son.
Yeah,
yeah. I'm from LA. On the same debate camp. Yeah.
Yep, we would have seen each other at state qualifiers and the whole thing.
Yeah.
I was just a troublemaker in class, and I was funny enough. I was in computer class, and my teacher, Miss Takeuchi, would just catch me. I was just being a smartass. I was in the back of class, making quips, shooting spitballs, just being a goof. And she kept giving me detention, and she said, if I can get you to be quiet, I won't give you detention, but you got to join this thing called forensics, public speaking.
Right.
And so I started competing in that, and then public speaking with academic decathlon, and that was my high.
Yeah.
I realized that being irreverent, pushing the boundaries of what is socially acceptable to say, i.e. that Jenga joke, would sometimes get a reaction, and that reaction gave me a sense of control.
Yeah.
In a way that in a lot of different ways in my life, I felt like I didn't have control.
Yeah.
And comedy and discovering comedy in college was this feeling of, for the first time in my life, I feel a sense of control. Because there's so many times in my life I just did not feel control.
And do you think that was because of, what were the factors in not feeling control? Like normal adolescent, like I'm just like, insecure, or race, or how
All
you're
of it.
raised, or what?
Yeah,
like what?
I think all of it. I think it was a lot of the adolescent angst and, hey, I don't get a say in my life.
Yeah.
Overbearing immigrant parents that want you to fit in a certain box and be a certain way. The lack of control over your own emotions and feelings. These things aren't making sense, and I wish I had an outlet to express them. I came of age in post 9/11 Bush America, so my dad was very involved at the mosque. I'd have to go to the mosque as a kid. I grew up in the era of the Patriot Act, and that became I tell my kind of Batman origin story in The King's Jester, but being irreverent, poking fun at those things, being like this doesn't make sense. In a weird way, that kind of naive troll energy gave me a sense of control and agency of my life. I would come to find out later in life, you can take that too far, but it is something that I deeply feel. It was that moment that I want to chase this for the rest of my life. That feeling that I had, it was just like this moment where the matrix, everything, all the binary code lines up in that moment.
Yeah.
When I can crack a joke and I can get people to laugh, I can feel it. It's the few times in my life I feel like everything makes sense.
And was there a particular moment as you said you were discovering comedy in college, was there a particular moment, a particular performance, or was it kind of a thing, in a accretion of different moments where you're like, okay, this is actually, this could actually be my life, not just, this is a satisfying thing that gives me that sense of all of those things you just said, those psychological payoffs, but you were like, this could be a career, I could go and do this is what I want to do, it's a singular passion. Was there a real watershed moment for that?
Yeah. I talk about, there's a story that I have in The King's Jester where I talk about when I was in high school and college, it was very popular in California specifically, and this became a Supreme Court case, where FBI agents would start hanging out at the mosque, and they would hang out with young teenagers.
Yeah.
And funny enough, there was a This American Life about this, but there'd be these feds that were Italian dudes who tanned, or like Hispanic dudes who would just all of a sudden try to hang out with like young brown kids in basketball shorts and be like, hey, let's work out, let's hang out. And I remember I was very popular amongst my friends because I would just point out these narcs, and we would kind of troll them and make fun of them. Yeah. And I tell a story about how making fun of them and landing those jokes made me feel powerful in a time that I didn't feel powerful. Yeah. When I was in college, more specifically in the stand-up community, San Francisco had a burgeoning, booming stand-up comedy scene. And it has had a booming scene for a very long time. Some of my favorite comics came up in the 80s there. Margaret Cho, Robin Williams. It had a very booming scene in the 80s, but in the early 2000s, it had another booming scene where people like W. Kamau Bell, Arj Barker, Ali Wong, Moshe Kasher, and Brent Weinbach were doing just like incredible work, pushing, again, stretching the genre of comedy. Right. All 5 of those comedians that I listed were very different stylistically too. Right. Yeah. And what I loved about the San Francisco comedy scene at that time is that San Francisco as a city embraced all of that. Right. It's why it's one of my favorite comedy cities in the country. Yeah. A watershed moment for me was around 2008. There was a competition put together by the radio station Wild 94.9. I don't know if anyone is familiar with that radio station, but they have a thing called Best Comic Standing, and I won that. And I had to kind of compete against all my older brothers and sisters that I looked up to. Yeah. And I was able to win that. And that was a moment for me a few years in, I was about 4 years in at the time, that made me go, maybe I could actually really do this. I mean, it's outside of my day job at Office Max. Like, really do this for the rest of my life.
I mean, it's interesting, just like, I've obviously not seen everything you've ever done. Yeah. And would never claim to have. Sure. But it does seem like everything from the and you said this thing about how I came of age in the Patriot Act. It seems like everything, Patriot Act era, it seems like that politics with a small p and identity, that those were like cornerstones of your work from the very beginning. There was never a time
that I didn't know.
There were never a time where you would knock jokes, or the equivalent of grown-up knock. It was like, let's just there's a joke I can tell here that's not rooted in my autobiography, and my autobiography being part of a class of the other, targeted, and the politics of that era, and what that, that the power was partly about pushing back against what that power was doing to someone who was not a white person and someone who was living in that era.
Sure.
Is that right?
Yeah, a little bit of, I think one of the defining things, and I didn't realize this until recently, but it was constantly feeling like I was wearing an away jersey. Everybody around me is wearing a home jersey. I think I should be wearing a home jersey, but I feel like I'm wearing an away jersey. Yeah. And this is just kind of my analysis of the world as I wear this away jersey. For whatever reason, I'm not this enough, I'm not that enough, but that was kind of the lens through which I saw the world. And I didn't realize, now you're playing these old clips, I don't know how you found them, but I didn't realize, I didn't see that connective tissue. But I do know that it from the moment I started doing open mics, I really was seeking that feeling of control and understanding why I believed the things I believed, and comedy was a way for me to do that.
I mean, it's
makes sense of the human condition.
Yeah, and it's just like I was gonna my cheap little thing was gonna be like, there are not that many things I would say I want to give credit to the Bush administration for, but it's always like, Hasan, if it wasn't for the Bush administration, we might not have you.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, that's another thing George W. Bush can take credit for. Let's do one more from that. Let's do this Sikh temple shooting thing, number 6. Let's play that. This is from 2012. Yeah. I mean, this is crazy prescient. Crazy prescient. Play this.
Nearly a decade after 9/11, the biggest threat to our own domestic security and safety is homegrown domestic terrorism. Arizona, Aurora, Wisconsin. I don't want to talk about what race these people are, but it ain't brown dudes with beards and turbans. So the next time you want to pat me down at the airport for carrying contact lens solution, why don't you pat down Larry the Cable Guy with the NRA shirt and the deer hat?
Wow.
So that's from The Truth, right? That from the web series you did.
Just a web series, yeah.
But I mean, I think the date on that is that 2012? You're making that by 2012?
Yeah.
2012, that's 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And 9 years before the insurrection. I mean, the notion of the hearing FBI Director Chris Wray say, as he has over the course of the last few years repeatedly, that the greatest threat to American political and domestic stability is not foreign terrorists, but is domestic terrorists, and particularly white extremists. Yeah. That's I'm not trying to say you were like a soothsayer or something.
No.
You were just reading the writing on the wall, but that was not a common trope in comedy or in political commentary in 2012.
Sure.
We didn't have that kind of conversation.
Sure.
So, like, I'm curious even where that came from.
So I have a deep respect for the Sikh community. Growing up in Northern California, the forgotten part of Cali, by the way, I just want to say that. A lot of people shit on us. I grew up in Davis, which is right by Sacramento.
I myself have shit on you.
On
Davis, not I'm as a Los Angelino, we shit on Davis routinely.
Yeah.
And a San Franciscan shit on Davis too.
San
Diegans shit on Davis, we all
get
shit on
it.
Davis.
Yeah, we get it from all sides. Okay. But further up north the 5, there's a city called Yuba City, and they have a huge Sikh community. And I grew up in that area, growing up around Sikh Americans. And the Sikh community, those uncles, aunties, and their kids they're some of the oldest American citizens from the Desi diaspora. They arrived even before my parents came. My parents came in '82. Yeah. One of the things that I feel a strong kinship for their community for 2 reasons. First of all, after 9/11, a lot of Sikh people were targeted because they were assumed to be Muslim, and they never threw us under the bus. So I, tip my hat to them.
Yeah.
And I did a field piece about them on The Daily Show, and I said this satirically, joking, not joking. I would have thrown you guys under the bus in a heartbeat. Like, how could you guys do this for us? And they said it's part of our Sikh values. There's such a small minority community in India and in the country. So when that Sikh temple shooting happened, I just felt like I had to say something about it. And I think another thing, again, and it just comes from my personal experience, was I felt that through my lived experience. Yeah. So I wanted to kind of put that on wax. Again, and it's so wild that you play that clip. The director of that clip is Aristotle Athari, who is now a cast member of SNL. And he is, one of the few, again, Middle Eastern cast members on SNL and the cast. It's wild that I didn't know this at the time. Now you're putting this together. It's wild. I mean, kudos to all of you for putting that together. But the people that I was also happened to be my contemporaries in comedy at that time pushed me and inspired me to do work like that.
Margot, are you blushing back there?
Yes.
Yeah, she's blushing. That's good.
These are like amazing finds, Margot. I haven't thought about
Margot's
this
blushing
in years. Yeah.
I will say also though. I mean, earlier the hoodie was kind of okay. Like that whatever the fuck it is you're wearing on the truth. That weird silk red bathrobe. That I think was not the right.
That
choice.
wasn't the right move. That being said, we had to shoot that in my apartment building, and you know how like certain like fancy apartment buildings will be like, we have a communal library. Yeah. So I remember we saw it in the apartment building is called the Visconti, which is on 3rd and Bixel in downtown LA. And it's this kind of like fake Venetian apartment building where USC kids like sell weed. But I thought it was really nice. And so, it was, Ari and I thought, okay, like dress up in this like regal smoking jacket. I don't think it translates, but hopefully the joke's still.
It's one of those things where like you think back, you would like, for a child of the internet,
you
would have thought like maybe this will live on longer than I wanted to.
There's a dankness to it that I appreciate.
Yes,
though,
well, there's sometimes you go that far and it's like okay, it's like committing to the bit.
By the way, what's so sad when I look at these jokes and bits?
Yeah.
How like I appreciate the soul of what I'm saying, but I still cringe a little bit.
Yeah.
But then I think about someone like Nas who made like Illmatic when he was 19, and you can still play Illmatic now. I don't have an Illmatic. Like all my stuff is very kind of.
Well,
there's seeds in it, but there's like a lot of naivete and weird fashion choices. And
I don't know anything about classical music, but there's people who do always like, well, Beethoven wrote this. All these those fucking kids. Van Morrison made Astral Weeks at like the age of 19 or 20.
Yeah,
and you're like,
insane.
it's like God speaking.
How are you?
It's like God speaking through his.
How was
through his writing.
everything all so
there
perfect
at that point?
Art design, set design, costume design, voice, like take.
Yes.
Again, I'm speaking as a comedian, and maybe it's apples and oranges, but I'm like, how did you have all of that just figured out?
Do you know that there's in passing, I'll say this. I haven't watched the second half of Ozark yet, but there's an entire episode built around Illmatic. They made one of the last episodes they made where they made the entire thing around Illmatic, where the album is the only music on the album. I read about it the other day. I was like, fuck, I gotta watch that. But there's a fucking record that stands the test of time. They're making premium scripted drama, really high quality around your fucking record.
You think this show's good? You know what's really fucking good? Nas's 1993 hit album, Illmatic.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so I want to play. Here's a thing that's not you.
Okay.
It's 2014.
Sure.
October, November 2014.
Okay.
You're getting called in to go to your audition for The Daily Show.
Okay.
And this becomes a controversial thing that then becomes an important part of how you got your job at The Daily Show.
Sure.
Here's Ben Affleck, Bill Maher, and Sam Harris on Real Time in October 2014 talking about Islamophobia.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You're saying that Islamophobia is not a real thing. That if you're critical of something,
Well, it's not a real thing when we do it.
right.
Well, no,
It really isn't.
I'm not denying that certain people are bigoted against Muslims as people.
Right.
And that's a
That's
problem.
big of you.
But
But why are you so hostile about this
Because it's
concept?
gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so not.
It's like saying
It's
those
so not. You're
shifty Jew.
You're not listening
Absolutely
to
not.
what we are saying.
You guys are saying if you want to be liberals, believe in liberal principles like
Right.
freedom of speech, like
Right.
we are endowed by our forefathers with an inalienable rights, like all men are created
No.
equal.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
Of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad
But
ideas.
Islam
But
at
why
this moment
would-
is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So we have
That's just
ideas
a
like
fact.
blasphemy.
It is
It's an ugly thing to
Apostasy.
say. How about the
But
more than a billion
those-
people
those
who
are
aren't
Muslims too.
fanatical, who don't punch women, who just want to go to the store,
wait a second.
sandwiches,
Wait a
pray
second.
5 times a day,
Right.
and
Wait a
don't do
second.
any of the things that you're saying all Muslims
Okay,
do.
I'm-
Just
no, wait,
stereotyping.
I'm not saying
you
all
take
wait a
few bad
second.
things and you painting the whole group religion with that.
No,
same
let,
brush.
Yeah, this was surreal, man.
So there's a lot
This was surreal.
There's a lot of
Yeah.
crosstalk there, and I'll say something now I never thought I would say ever in my life, and I will probably never say again. I want to just read the words of Ben Affleck so everyone can hear them, because really, what he's talking about is like painting with a broad brush. Is how about the more than a billion people who aren't fanatical, who don't punch women, who want to go to school and have some sandwiches at the end of the day and don't do any of the things you're saying about all Muslims, like Ben Affleck, I'm 100% right,
Yeah.
But this became a thing. This was a viral thing. People talked about it. It was a
Yeah.
controversy, and you basically did an audition.
Yeah.
You changed what you were planning to do as your audition
Totally.
to do a thing based on that.
It was
Talk about that.
It was such a seminal moment for a couple reasons. Well, first of all, I had to go in and screen test very quickly, and one of the things that I had to think about was, what can I add to the show? There were so many great correspondents on the show already at the time, who had John Oliver had just left, Michael Che had just left. You have Jordan Klepper, Jessica Williams, Samantha Bee, Jason Jones. What can I add to the show?
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where I felt I could add this perspective. This was incredibly prescient and kind of jaw-dropping. I don't think I can put words on how important this was for us as a community. We don't have a lot of people speaking out for us. So for Ben Affleck, Batman, albeit his performance wasn't great in Batman v Superman, but Batman to be like, I spent time around a ton of Muslims when I was directing Argo. Yeah. And I'm telling you, the way you're describing them, this very niche, extremist, boogeyman, they all dress like ninjas and they live in the desert, and this kind of they're all like ISIS. For him to be like, yeah, they're just regular people, and I've spent time with them. Why don't you convey what 99.99% of them are like? Is dangerous. You're creating this very broad brush that you're painting them with. That Batman versus Bill Maher moment was like, yeah, I need to talk about this.
Yeah.
And it kind of, my comedy take was, yeah, we tend to be dorks. We're not dangerous. We're studying for the DAT, not, we're not going to destroy buildings and stuff like that. And it was just a very powerful moment. I couldn't believe what I was watching, as sad as that is to say.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen a prominent A-list celebrity kind of speak out on our behalf. And it's weird. I think it was very powerful and meaningful to me.
You got there. You did 4 years of The Daily Show.
Yeah.
Right. And most of it with Trevor.
Mm-hmm.
And it, was an important thing in your evolution as an artist and in your career. Just how do you I know you had just watching you at the end when you did your farewells. Obviously, you had a fucking great time doing it. But just talk about. The Daily Show by that point wasn't obviously a huge institution.
Yes.
But John was leaving, and
Yes.
there was a lot of questions, as there always is when a new host comes in, about Trevor.
Yes.
What was it like to be in that space, and what do you think you learned there, and what did it do for you?
Yeah. I think the John years that I was there, I get there, and it's kind of his Chicago Bulls last dance moment. And it was the John Voyage year. But getting to see him up close, I got to see him do Act Ones, and I really got to see his greatness as a comedian. And one of the things I think that is a testament to a great comedian or satirist is when you are able to provide moral clarity in times of social panic. So when the Sandy Hook shooting happened, when all of these really horrible, horrific events happen, generally we turn to the daily or nightly satirist show to see who has the best take or kind of moment of clarity. I got to see John do that several times, and that was just, I'm seeing magic. I'm seeing greatness in action.
Yeah.
Nobody can plan that. Nobody can plan. And I saw him do some things where they didn't even load it up in the prompter. They would load up parts of it, but his ability to stitch it all together was pretty incredible. The second thing that I saw that I think is missing and I still long for deeply is that he is a good faith actor.
Yeah.
And if you work in media long enough, there's not a lot of good faith actors. There's a lot of, unfortunately, sociopathic, sycophantic, clickbait type actors that are out here grifting.
Yeah.
And they're here for the quote tweets and the dunks and the retweets. John wasn't that. He kind of showed me a decent path forward.
Yeah.
And I could have studied under a person who had a very different MO. I'm really lucky that he came to me at a period of time in my life. I'm 30 years old, I'm just getting married. Like, he really shaped how I want to carry myself in show business. The Trevor years, what Trevor taught me, he is such an incredible talent. I don't think a lot of people give him credit because they see the dimples and how handsome he is, and they don't know how talented he is. Yeah. His perspective, his voice, his impressions, there's things that he has that I think The Daily Show and the landscape needed. I know you chatted with Larry Wilmore. Larry is also one of those guys. Yeah. We need people like that in this space. And for the longest time, we were operating a space with two Jimmys, a Steve and a John. There were no Trevors, and we need that. And I think America needed that and needs that.
I'm psyched to see him. Like, he's finally, it's that. It was a rough. I mean, I just always like to follow Jon Stewart.
It's really rough.
I mean, shoot me. I'd be like, it's great to follow. It's awesome when you follow someone who sucks. Terrible, like he's a fucking, deity.
With Kilborn, it was, when John took that over, it was a middling show.
Yeah.
It was a middling show on Comedy Central.
Yeah.
But I remember there was this photo campaign that Comedy Central used. I'll never forget this. They didn't end up using it, but it was just so. It was so telling of what Trevor would have to go through. It was him in the suit, he's standing in the studio, and he's wearing gigantic shoes. And that's it. He's got huge shoes to fill.
Oh my God, yeah.
And that was the defining thing that Trevor had to go through.
Yeah.
And what I got to witness up close is, he could have turned that office upside down, and he didn't. The media was ripping him, the opinion columns were ripping him, and I'll be honest, I had private conversations with my wife, Bina. I was like, hey, I don't think we're going to be able to renew the lease.
Right.
We had just gotten married.
Right.
And I was like, there's a pretty good chance that he cleans house.
Yeah.
Or after these reviews come in, he's just like, I got to shake things up.
Right.
Who wouldn't? And he didn't.
Yeah.
And he stayed the course, and he let me, Roy Wood Jr., Klepper, Ronnie Chang, Jessica Williams really grow and become who we were going to become. And he never stopped me from becoming who I wanted to become. And I owe him a lot.
Well, that's part of why it's great to see. He's finally, like it's happened now, sort of. The corner got turned. The digital team is incredible.
Yes.
And then the stuff. The
and
show, he's broke through.
He's had his tentpole moments.
Yes, he's had his moments.
His moments, again, of moral clarity in times of social panic.
Yeah.
I mean, he really was one of the go-to voices, I think, the summer of 2020 when the George Floyd stuff was happening. And he's been a real great. The aha moment for me I had with him when he had his Act One, Trump is an African dictator. I thought that was such a great hey, you're not seeing this way. Let me stretch the way you think about the world. But then I was like, when I saw that, I was like, yeah, this guy's really special.
It's also nice that they've like that. I think those long form things when the digital stuff that's off the show.
Between the scenes.
It's those have to go to the thing you said earlier at the very beginning when you were talking about like why. Having more time and being able to kind of show various things like that you're interacting in good faith, or that you're sincere, that allows people to appreciate things. Like there's formats that work better for some people than for others.
Yeah.
There's a thing that stuff really is enhanced and kind of created a good feedback loop, right? Where it's like he's doing stuff there that he couldn't do on the show, but it kind of reflects back on the show and makes him bigger and gives him credibility and builds the audience on the show. It's nice to see them using it, finding a new model for how to make that work.
Yeah,
right?
And I think that is another thing that it's interesting when we talk about comedy. Even as you're playing old clips from the Patriot Act, how many jokes per second you kind of have to have.
Yeah.
It's like exposition, joke. And one of the things that's so tantamount to becoming a great comedian is you can't just be funny.
Right.
How interesting are you?
Yeah.
And Trevor is a very interesting person and a deeply interested person.
Yeah.
He's interested in a lot of things. He's very curious and very thoughtful. And those between the scenes convey that.
I want to play number 9. One Daily Show thing of Hasan. Let's just because it's got Justin Trudeau now. Let's play that, and we'll talk about it.
Okay.
Canada. From their awful beer to their god-awful Canadian tuxedos, they've got a lot to apologize for. But now, they've got a new reason to say sorry, and it's coming to destroy America. I'm talking about Syrian refugees. Canada's super progressive Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has already allowed more than 25,000 of these potential terrorists into Canada. I decided to seek out the man who started this mess. The one Canadian who could shut this whole thing down.
Why are you trying to destroy North America? You're letting anyone walk in and just up.
North America was built with people fleeing persecution, conflicts, wars, trying to build a better life for themselves and their families.
It's too open, it's too free. Mr. JT, I went to Customs and they were like, what are you here to do? And I'm like, I am here to roast Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And do you know what the guy said? Have a nice day.
Yeah.
What if I came here to literally roast you?
You might find that a little more difficult than you think.
Are you gonna kick my ass right now?
Are you gonna literally roast me?
No.
Then we're fine.
This just seems like
Those are the best moments on the show, by the way.
like so much fun.
Yeah, those are the best.
Right?
That moment,
I mean, you're talking to a head of state, right? So,
Yeah.
like, I mean, it's kind of like
it was the best. It's the best.
Was that the first time you've ever done anything like that?
Yeah, it's the
Where
first
you, like,
time I
not
ever
literally
did it.
Trudeau, but I mean, going out and doing those kind of things, like playing a reporter.
Where
you know?
where you're sitting down with like the prime minister of the country.
Yes, right.
Yeah, and he's kind of like, yeah, if you try to roast me, I will kick your ass.
Yeah.
It's a very, even the reaction shot on that, it's a sincere reaction. To me, that's the best comedy, where it's like, it's grounded in a very real yet funny moment.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought, you know, that thing, the invention of that part,
Yes.
which Colbert also
Yes.
did, and others
Yes.
have done. Many famous people have been Daily Show correspondents, like with that model, that
Yes.
format,
Yeah.
has served them really
the kind
well.
of idiot abroad, and you have to commit to the bit, and you have a satirical comedic
Right.
take on flipping the sort of local news package.
You were just like naturally really good at it. I mean, to the point where like there's a handful of people very quickly. I mean, look, you ended up hosting, giving and talking at the White House Correspondents' Dinner in
Yes.
2017, right?
Right.
You started the Daily Show in 2014, right?
2014, right.
That's a very, in terms of speed,
Right.
of like you went like basically no one knew you in America
Yeah,
to being
yeah.
someone giving a speech at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
Right.
Is that weird? I mean,
It
I want to
was
talk
very-
about fame and because a lot of the King's Gesture is about exactly this on
Yeah.
a much grander scale. But
Yeah.
like with that, like was like wow, like all of a sudden I'm this person.
It's very shocking because, and I didn't realize this, and when you talk to people who work at SNL, it's the same thing too. When you work at these sort of New York comedy institutions,
Yeah.
you don't see the light of day. Like,
Right.
I mean that sincerely.
Yeah.
You get to the office at 9:15 and you'll just stay there. And sometimes you would stay there through taping, and when you're a young correspondent and you're not getting on the show, and I went through that, you'll stay longer and be like, okay, I have to research and I have to write pitches for tomorrow's 9:15. So you won't leave. And so I didn't get an understanding of the resonance the pieces were having until several years in, and then people are starting to recognize you when you're, in the West Village or at the Comedy Cellar, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're on the Daily Show."
Yeah.
You just think you're doing a black box theater show every night.
Sure.
The set is tiny on 604 West 52nd.
yeah.
It's just this tiny little,
Yeah.
and you're scrapping. And you talk to anybody at SNL or the Daily Show, every correspondent or cast member is like, "I'm just scrapping to get on this week."
Right, and I think when you get to the point where you're well enough known that people on the street know kind of say
Yeah.
things, it's like always a weird thing for anybody.
Yeah.
But like this, I mean, there's another thing though, a different level of that when you're suddenly being invited to go and speak at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Like, did that surprise you that you would get that when they asked you that you had gotten to that point that quickly?
So the year before, I had done something called the RTCA dinner, the Radio Television
Yeah, right.
Correspondents Association dinner,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
like, it's like the
Sort of the bargain basement WHC.
yeah, the D League.
Yeah.
Before and you try to play it, and maybe you get
It's
drafted up.
off
to the league.
Broadway.
Yeah, way off
Off
Broadway.
Broadway,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's over in Jersey.
Yeah.
And I did that. Funny enough, and it's weird. I don't know if it's destiny or kismet. I had to do that the week the Pulse nightclub shooting happened, and so it was this weird thing of like, how are we going to be funny in this very tense, strange moment in the country. And again, this is where timing and being a comedian and understanding how to convey the right message at the right time. Funny enough, so many sitting members of Congress were there, and connecting the dots between, yeah, I'm gonna do 15 minutes of jokes, but I would be remiss if I did not point out the NRA's involvement with Congress.
Right.
And the decision makers that could have prevented something as terrible as the Pulse nightclub shooting happening that week.
Yeah.
You know? And that became, again, another linchpin moment, and I think the WHCA saw that, Jeff Mason, and then invited me the next year to do the correspondence dinner.
So you go to do it. Let's talk about timing. It's the
Yeah.
first correspondence dinner in the age of Trump.
Yes.
Trump is not in attendance.
Right.
I'll set the stage for this just because I'm going to play just a little bit of it, but you're asked not to, you say at the very beginning, I've been asked not to roast Donald Trump.
Yes, yes.
Which is like, okay, like, wait, what? Because
Yeah.
I've been to some of those dinners. I'll
Yes.
never go again. And if God
Sure.
smiles on me, I'll never have to go to one of those dinners again.
Sure.
But that's a weird request,
Yes.
number one. Number two, the president's not there, so that's also weird. You're not being asked to roast somebody who's not there, not roast
Very
someone who's not there.
strange, yeah.
A very strange set of things. And then you do this thing. You did a great smart thing, which you made fun of the press a lot, which is always all good.
Sure, sure.
And you did this thing where you talked about how the press were basically now like honoring minorities.
Oh, right.
And kind of the core, I thought in some ways was kind of the heart of it in some ways to sort of say,
What's the point?
Yeah, how did you get to that?
It's always working backwards.
Yeah.
It's hey, so what is the thing I'm really trying to say? And we actually started with that. And it's funny, Prashant and I, we kind of wrote that down.
Yeah.
Of hey, your job is more important than ever. You're in a contentious relationship with the president. When one of you messes up, it somehow is reflective of the entire group, which was the Geraldo Rivera joke.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to be Muslim. This is what it feels like to be a minority.
Yeah.
And that was again, comedy is all about simile and metaphor. This is like that.
Right.
And the fastest you can get to that core distillation, that espresso,
Right.
once you have that, grab onto it, man, and then start building from there. Funny enough, our friend Steve Bodo, he was a big advisor to me. He was the showrunner at The Daily Show at the time, and he goes, this is what's most interesting.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not here to say, I ask Steve all the time, and, and shout out to all the OGs who have helped me and mentored me. Hey, am I on the fast train to Naive Town?
Yeah,
Because young comics do have that, and Steve was like, this is good.
Yeah.
There were some other takes we had. He's like, cut that. That's not great.
Yeah.
And I'm not even going to get into that stuff. But he was like, this is really interesting and unique, and only you can pull it off.
Everybody in their life needs a Steve Bodo.
Yeah, you do.
So to do the last edit.
You really do. You really do. Steve's really great at that.
But this thing, you're basically like, Trump has made the press an enemy at a very basic level. The press an enemy, so we're minorities in that sense. And he treats us, if you're all the same, he can't tell the distinction. All the press is all fake news, right? And the joke that you mentioned, which is, in the representative, I hate to say it right now, you're all being represented by Geraldo
Rivera.
That's funny. Also, the not seeing Steve Bannon, not see Steve Bannon. That was funny, good.
Just a little clever.
And you went after CNN, you went after MSNBC, you went after all these people. Then you get to the end, and this is what happens. I'll play this part, which is you then repeat that you were asked not to roast Donald Trump, and then this is what happens at the very end of the speech.
We are in a very strange situation where there's a very combative relationship between the press and the president. But now that you guys are minorities, just for this moment, you might understand the position I was in, and it's the same position a lot of minority kids feel in this country. And it's, do I come up here and just try to fit in and not ruffle any feathers? Or do I say how I really feel? Because this event is about celebrating the First Amendment and free speech. Free speech is the foundation of an open and liberal democracy. From college campuses to the White House. Only in America can a first-generation Indian American Muslim kid get on this stage and make fun of the president. The orange man behind the Muslim ban. And it's a sign to the rest of the world. It's this amazing tradition that shows the entire world that even the president is not beyond the reach of the First Amendment. But the president didn't show up because Donald Trump doesn't care about free speech. The man who tweets everything that enters his head refuses to acknowledge the amendment that allows him to do it. Think about it. It's almost, what is it, 11? It's 11 p.m. right now. In 4 hours, Donald Trump will be tweeting about how bad Nicki Minaj bombed at this dinner. And he'll be doing it completely sober.
Callback, nice.
Yeah,
Okay.
the Minaj thing was good. I had to get to that.
Okay.
Did you feel okay in that room? There was some. You were great, I thought. Just like Stephen was great, and Stephen.
Yeah.
When Stephen, there were some quiet moments in that gig.
Yeah. So if I'm going to be just really critical and harsh, and Steve would do this too, he'd be like, "You were talking too fast, and you were very nervous the first 6 minutes."
Yeah.
And then I kind of hit my stride around minute 7, and it started to feel more natural, and I kind of dropped into the room. Even that moment that you just played right now, like, what time is it, 11?
Yeah.
This is gonna sound so dorky. Those are those comedy moments I want to keep working on.
Right.
Of just like, hey, this isn't a scripted thing. This is just me being real in the room.
Yeah.
And like the Jedis that I look up to, they're like that 90% of the time where it's like, man, fuck the script. They could just be in that, it's 11, right? Like, they could eat and then get on stage. They're that relaxed. But that room is tough. And Stephen was the one who told me, you're not going to do great. And Colbert told me that. Yeah. And Seth Meyers told me that as well. Yeah. You're not going to do great. Yeah. So just remember you're playing to camera one. I'm glad I said what I said at the end.
Yeah.
And again, I got to thank Bodo for helping me with this, and Prashant being the head writer there. You know, they say about Rick Rubin, they say, have you heard this? He's not a producer, he's a reducer. Some of my favorite comedy writers and people that I work with will just lift some of the extraneous stuff that I sometimes have in the script that allow those moments to land with a level of clarity. And it's wild that that idea of, do I toe the line? Do I not ruffle any feathers? It's interesting. It's just something that I've always kind of brushed against my entire career, because I had that same moment with Ellen with pronouncing my name.
Yeah.
And, you know, going down, my dad told me, like, I'm on the phone with the producer and I'm feeling a certain way. And I remember my dad and my mom, they drove down. My mom's a huge Ellen fan.
Yeah.
She works at the VA. She, like, took the day off and went down. And out of, like, a 7-minute interview, 4 of it is just like, okay, let's just talk about, can we pronounce my name right? Because we can say Benedict Cumberbatch perfectly fine.
Yeah.
We're just walking around saying Leonardo DiCaprio as if that's a normal sounding name. So can we just do Hasan? Like, can we, you know?
Yeah.
And I remember that it was the same thing. My parents were very upset that, like, why are you making a scene about this stuff?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I have some theories about that, but
we'll plow through. Okay.
Well, this is at the point you're basically, it's not quite when you left the Daily Show, but it's getting close. And
it's getting close.
You know, you're getting close, right?
It's turning the corner, yeah.
And there's this, where I think we'd be fair to say that, like, the period after that is like, do you think of this as a Homecoming King, Patriot Act, and King's Jester are kind of a piece, right?
Yeah.
That's the different era, right?
Yeah, well, you know, funny enough, this happened, and then Homecoming King came out a month later.
Right.
And so people kind of got to see, I think it was my real introduction to America.
Yeah.
Capital A America.
Yeah.
People who don't watch The Daily Show on Instagram and YouTube, it's like, a lot of people watch The Correspondence Dinner. It gets, you know, put on the cover of the Washington Post and the New York Times and stuff like that. So it was my introduction to, like, my political comedy, and then Homecoming King, like, my personal story. It was like my X-Men origin story of, this is who I am and this is my story in New Brown America.
I'll play one. Let me play a Homecoming Thing. Then play number 13, and then I want to go right to that question. So play that. Play number 13.
Look, immigrants aren't going to hit their children the way you guys do. Americans hit their kids on the arm and bruise their body. Immigrants slap you across the face and bruise your soul. It's Guantanamo of the mind. Do you remember when brown kids get slapped at birthday parties? Every brown birthday party. And usually, it's the kid whose birthday it is, and we stand there, and we point at him, we laugh, we go, Bijou got slapped on his birthday. And that's what makes us tough and resilient. And it's why we become cardiologists and win spelling bees, right? Slapping is important. It elevates your game. Have you ever seen an Indian kid win the spelling bee? Incredible. Ice water in the veins, Kobe. That kid's not gonna choke on camera. He's been slapped on camera. Of course he can spell Canadal.
Canadal.
Look at that face. Nothing. Nothing. He's 12 years old. Nothing. This kid just won $30,000 cash. Nothing.
So like that, the decision. You just described two different yous.
Yeah.
Right, a second ago, and then this you is you. This is a different you.
Yeah.
Than most of America knew. Right?
Yes.
Like just what felt necessary about putting that you out?
Yeah.
And what felt scary about it? Like what was the calculus there? Because I say this to someone like you could do all the Daily Show stuff is an example of a way like I could talk about presidents and rap stars. I can talk about anything. Like I'm not talking about me, and you can figure out who I am on the basis of the way I talk about it. But I'm not really talking about me. I can even tell some stories about me along the way, but I'm not really talking about me.
Yeah.
This is where you go. I'm going to make a thing about me, and I'm going to talk about stuff that like a lot of people don't normally talk about. Like you know that this topic area is going to be something that like a lot of comedy fans are going to go, I've never heard anything like this before.
Right,
You're going to open a door into a culture I know nothing about.
Yeah.
So what's like going through your head is you're like, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I hope to accomplish, and this is what scares me about it.
Funny enough, you had the great Mike Birbiglia on the podcast, but I think I had kind of failed as a traditional stand-up, to be candid with you. And what I mean by that is that when I look at some of the pure stand-ups that I really love, that can just sit down on a stool and talk, Michael Che, Michelle Wolf, Chappelle, Rock, you can put them up at an improv, 2-drink minimum in a basement, and they can rock for 60 minutes. And I think while I can do that at a pretty proficient level, I think it was Mike and Colin Quinn who really introduced me to the dynamic range that was possible in comedy. Right. And what they were doing in the theater space, between Mike Birbiglia, Colin Quinn, and Bo Burnham, when I saw what they were doing to stretch the genre, they really inspired me, and I was able to follow Mike's path from doing the first prom story that became the tentpole and Homecoming King at the Moth, taking that to the Sundance Labs, developing it at the Sundance Labs under the tutelage of Michelle Satter, and then taking it to Cherry Lane Theater. All while I was at The Daily Show.
Yeah.
And so that was something that was just brewing underneath. Yeah. And I was never able to, it was too big to fit in an act 2. It would never fit in an act 2. There was so much in me that I wanted to share. It was a risk. I didn't know how it would resonate. There are stand-up purists that are like, this isn't pure stand-up. Right. But then again, it's really funny, when you look back on anything, you talk about Carlin, I don't think it was pure stand-up to be a Supreme Court case either. No. Like, I don't think that was what was intended for jazz club and nightclub comedians to do. So I didn't know it at the time. You're just trying to express yourself as authentically as possible. But I think I could surmise that it resonated because for a long time there was a huge group of people that did not have their experience synthesized in 72 minutes that way. Yeah. And I think that was a calling card for New Brown America, because so many people that I've met in the years since it came out were like, that special spoke to me. My life was so that, The King's Jester is very different because it's just so what I've lived through.
Yes, yes.
But this was very much, I feel like New Brown America rallied behind it because of that moment.
Right,
and because of the stories of it.
And that's like if you were thinking about like how you've evolved. You kind of just laid it out. You're just kind of like,
this is who I am.
Right.
And The King's Jester is, why do I believe what I believe?
Yes, right.
It's really about that.
Yeah.
What is my relationship to jokes? And how far am I willing to take a joke?
Right. The prom night story.
Sure.
Just because you mentioned it, I could have done. There's another story in there about what the 9/11 story with the Camry window, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Very not comedy.
Not comedy.
Drama.
But
drama.
just
And about family. This is another example. You just said this is the key thing. I want to play this, and then we'll number 15, please.
Sure.
I get to her house. I've been there a million times. I park my bike. I'm walking up to the doorstep, and I'm about to ring the doorbell. I was like, no, wait, take this in. 30-second timeout. Do you understand what's about to go down? You're about to go to prom with Bethany motherfucking Reed. This is the American dream.
This is what Dad fought for. Ding dong. Mrs. Reed opens the door. She has this look of concern on her face. And I look over her shoulder. I see this dude, Jeff Burke, putting a corsage on Bethany's wrist. And she's like, oh my God, honey, did Bethany not tell you? Oh, sweetie, we love you. We think you're great, and we love that you come over and study. But tonight's one of those nights where, we have a lot of family back home in Nebraska, and we're gonna be taking a lot of photos tonight. So we don't think it'd be a good fit. Do you need a ride home?
Wow. You haven't watched that in a long time.
I mean, you can be a human being and not be like, and kind of like choked up a little bit, right?
Right.
But it's like, that's that is where you're like living in the space of theater and storytelling and trying to make people cry, or not trying to, but trying to move them in a certain way. That's not at all about making anybody laugh.
Yeah.
There's barely a laugh in that. It's a minute and 8 seconds long. There's a little laugh in the middle, but not really. The humor's not really there. And that 9/11 story I mentioned is another one of those things. There's no laugh. There's some laughs around, but there's chunks of it where it's like, it's just all drama and pain.
Right.
I mean, that's going in an interesting place.
Yeah, it's, as a writing exercise, I remember Greg, who's the director of the show, was just, as we were working on the show, was just write some of the most embarrassing moments in your life. So we just started there.
Yeah.
And I remember when I would just workshop parts of the story, he's like, that's really interesting. This doorstep scene is very powerful and interesting. And it feels like it's something only you've experienced. But I think I didn't find this out until later. There are so many people that I talked to later that had a similar doorstep scene, whether it was due to race or sexuality, coming out of the closet, all of those things that I presented myself to the world, and that was not accepted. And I think a lot of people were able to resonate with that. But it's not particularly comedic, but again, it's the dynamic range that theater and storytelling and comedy allow you to explore, that theater allows you to, that you can't do in the comedy club.
Right. I'm not going to play any Patriot Act, but there's two. The very first one is about Saudi Arabia and the Khashoggi killing, right?
Yeah.
Later, you do, a couple seasons later, I think, is when you do the one about the death of the news business and local news and Alden Capital, big private equity, hedge fund, whatever the fuck they are. Both of them play in King's Jester, which is why it kind of like, the Patriot Act is like basically taking the Daily Show, and they're 18 minutes long.
Right.
And you're like doing 18 minutes on going deep on these topics.
Right.
We talked about a little bit about Patriot Act earlier, obviously an incredible show. But it's, you're still on these, you got these tracks, there's that, and there's a very, very highbrow version of a news show that would never be on cable, not cable news, not like MSNBC or CNN. And that shows incredible impact. In fact, again, like you just talked about, this resonating with Brown America, like every step up, you're getting better and better known. And the reason I'm focusing on the fame element of it is that is what King's Jester is about. Is essentially all this stuff is happening very fast. You are getting more and more famous for different kinds of things. The banner carrier for Brown America, one of the smartest people in political commentary, all that stuff, right? And you are getting, by your own account, if I believe what I heard at Radio City Music Hall, becoming kind of a narcissistic asshole of just like absorbed in the fucking tweet world, and all you're doing is like and that's what the examination. Is that fair to say that's what King's Jester is? An examination of your own narcissism, the kind of headspace of the monkey on your back of the tweet and click culture. And all of that shit, and what the costs and benefits are, and how to reckon with it all for you and your family. Just talk about like that. That's what this is what you're about to shoot the special. We'll all get to see it on Netflix fairly soon. You're going to do it in June. Here in New York City.
Here in New York City. At BAM in Brooklyn.
At BAM. So like, I mean, just for people who haven't seen King's Jester, it's an incredible show. I told you that the night I saw it, but you're like all of it, everything up to now that's happened to you in this incredible decade you've had is sort of reflected in this thing.
If I were to give you the log line for folks who haven't seen it, and if you've listened to this conversation, comedy was this thing in my life that gave me an incredible amount of control. And comedy is also one of those things when I took it too far, made me lose a lot of control in my life. And it put my family through a lot, it put my marriage through a lot. And The King's Jester is an exploration on how far I'm willing to take a joke. This thing that originally gave me control, but I lost a lot of fucking control.
What's that mean?
The cost that it had on me, my faith, my ability to make my pilgrimage, my Hajj, because of the stuff that I've done, needling dictators and autocrats, the threats that my family have faced. Thankfully, they weren't successful. And the impact that it had on my marriage, because I've talked about this in Homecoming King, and I talk about this in The King's Jester. What me and Bina had to go through to get married and then even have kids. We had a lot of fertility problems. And then to know that jokes were something that saved my life, but then almost cost me my family's life, is a line that, yeah, I'm not willing to cross anymore. And I explore how clout chasing, clickbait, the thrill of provocation can get you pretty drunk.
All things you just said make it sound like a very supremely serious thing. It's fucking hilarious, right?
Uh-huh.
It's really funny.
Yeah. It's a comedy show. It's a comedy show.
No, and it really
yeah.
is. It's high energy. It's not only just comedy. It's your usual energy level.
Yeah.
You are.
I'm doing voices and impressions.
It's like your usual self, and you're moving around. You're like all the stuff you do.
Yeah.
So it's not like a somber thing.
Sure.
But the themes in the middle of it are all about this, and I won't give away the sort of spoiler of the moment when things come to a head where it becomes where the risk and the threat becomes most acute and most palpable.
Yes, and it outweighs the reward significantly.
What has happened to it over the 100 or odd shows? Is it just really about the way that that piece of writing is just reducing all of the inessential and getting down to that thing you just said? The log line is everything, and any joke, even if it works, that doesn't serve that, gotta go.
Yes, and Steve has been incredibly helpful at that, and Prashant has been incredibly helpful at that, is figuring out the core essence of, this is the point of the show. Comedy was this tool that gave me control, and it's also something, when abused, made my life go out of control. What is my line? And I find that oddly prescient given everything that's being talked about right now with comedy, cancel culture, and what is the line.
Yeah.
But I wanted to use my own personal story. Fuck getting pulled into the news headlines of what this comedian can or can't say. I'm here to tell you what I'm willing to not say.
Yeah, and you actually come up with a formula in a way. I mean,
I don't want to give it away.
I'm not going to give it away either. I'm just saying but it's not a mathematical formula. But it's a way of judging where to in a pretty clear way in your head where you can be like, this is where I'll draw a line, and this is where I want.
Yeah, and I think maybe the way I certainly hope the audience walks away understanding through my story is, hey, we all get to say whatever the fuck we want.
Yeah.
There is a cost, though.
Yeah.
There is a cost to freedom of speech, and are you willing to pay the vig? And we all have to adjudicate that for ourselves.
Right.
You obviously work in media. We get to tweet whatever we want. You get to say whatever we want. We get to poke whoever we want. But we have to figure out, how do we want to move and navigate in this? And it's interesting. Comedy isn't just this basement-dwelling art form for me anymore.
Yeah.
I'm now doing it on some pretty big stages. And so I have to figure out, hey, what type of jokes am I willing to do?
And people remember back at the end of, I think it was at the end of 2018, when there was that guy who was he sent all those pipe bombs to people, sent them, and none of them blew up. Sent Obama, Clinton, all these people. When they arrested that guy, I was shooting the circus. I got back home, and the FBI called me after they arrested him and was like, just want to let you know that you were on a list. There was a list of, and my wife had been going, do you think it's a good, should we be worried about the package room? This all was happening. A couple media people have been targeted. I was like, don't worry about it, it'll be fine. And then they called and they're like, he's in jail, so it's fine. But there was a list, and you were on a list of 25 people. And again, it's not, nothing happened to me. I was never in real jeopardy. None of the bombs worked, for one thing. But it still makes you think about it at that moment. You're like, what the fuck? That's, it makes it real in a way
And you talk about, we've been talking about control this entire conversation. You start to just realize, especially given everything that's going on right now, how little control you actually have in your life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
When you're out there, and you start to realize, and given the way the country is right now, it's right. At some point, I remember thinking back in 2012, in the Obama re-election, I realized there was a moment where if I went on television and someone said, what are Barack Obama's chances of getting reelected? I would say, the economy's not been that great, but he's a very powerful political communicator. He's going to have a lot of money. The Republican field is weak. I'd say, if you take all the Ray Track, all together, I think he's a mild favorite for reelection. And I would get on Twitter hundreds of people from the right saying, "Stop sucking Barack Obama's dick."
Holy shit.
And I get hundreds of people on the left, often a lot of African American ladies, who'd be like, "You hate the president, you fucking racist." And I would go, that was when I realized it was out of my control.
Right.
Like I would try to find the most neutral, mild thing on one hand. On the other hand, I was it doesn't actually matter what I say, because those people are going to be, unless I say he's God or Satan, they're going to hate me. And so it's like, I can, at some point you go, I'm in no control of that, because that's the way the culture is so out of control that like, it kind of doesn't matter what. I mean, there are some things I could do that would probably really get me killed, but a lot of things you can't, like playing it safe doesn't get you to safety, as it turns out, because so much of it's outside your control.
Totally.
And I think it's probably true in your case too, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
and for me, it's asking myself within, hey, what do I really want to say vis-a-vis my family and my wife specifically, and knowing that that's the path forward. I can't listen to the other noise.
It's and I mentioned the Khashoggi and the Saudi Arabia and the Alden thing because they both play in King's Jester, and they both are examples of things where one of them, I mean, the Khashoggi thing, I don't think it was first episode, second episode of the show.
Yes.
I don't think you recognized what it was going to do.
No.
By the time you got to the Alden Capital episode, you were now starting to make calculations around that, and it's interesting as it plays out in King's Gesture, like as your dawning awareness of the power and the anger of the stuff you can do in the service of comedy and just being smart.
Yes.
That's a thing. I mean, that's an important reckoning, but it's not a reckoning you necessarily would have expected when you started. Like, wow, oh hey, I say shit and.
I poke this and it pokes back.
Yeah.
And that's a very intoxicating feeling.
Yeah.
Unless it goes awry.
Yeah. The social media stuff in King's Gesture is also crazy.
Oh, great.
I know you got to go. I got to ask you one last question, which do you think is actually going to be meaningful? The thing I learned in King's Gesture, which I did not know, is that you no longer live in New York City.
Yes.
People who are great friends of yours, I'm sure have known this for a while. You live in Connecticut.
Yeah.
In what I perceive, on the basis of stereotypes, to be a very white, very leafy, very affluent suburban bedroom community.
Sure.
Which we won't name.
Yes.
But it feels interesting to me that it's meaning that living in basically suburban Connecticut is meaningful. What does it mean to you, to your family? What is that like? Taking that step to go move as a brown man who was a kid from not super urban California, but lived in a lot of urban places. Very much an urban creature. Comedy person comes here, succeeds in New York in
Manhattan,
the hotbed. The whole thing we were just describing.
Yeah.
And then like I'm gonna move to Connecticut. Thank you. Like, I don't mean why did you do it, but I mean, what does it mean that you did it?
I know you're just
and
what's your deal, bro?
Well, I do slightly. It's nothing I would ever do. But then I'm a white dude. Whatever. I don't know. All I know is that it has to be. It's not a step you just took lightly, and it means something. It must mean something to Bina. It must mean something about your family. It has some greater significance than just a change of scenery.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we had our son, we were still living in Manhattan, and we've lived in this city for 8 years. It really, you're right, it shaped who I am.
Yeah.
I really claim New York as my city, especially as a comedy city. It gave me everything in my career. When my son was born, just candidly, the 2-bedroom apartment in Hell's Kitchen just wasn't cutting it. And I was like fast asleep in the living room with my mother-in-law, like asleep on the floor, and I'm like, how did I come back to being an open micer all over again, where I'm like asleep on an air mattress? But funny enough, I would go on these writers' retreats, and there was a cabin in Connecticut that myself, John Mulaney, and sometimes Mark Birbiglia would use to write. It was an Airbnb, and at the beginning of the pandemic, I reached out to the guy who runs the Airbnb and said, "Hey, can we stay out here for a little bit?" Yeah. And as I got to know the community, I realized I can't live in rural Connecticut. I'm not the woods guy. We had a wasp problem. I'm like, I'm not the wasp guy. I'm just not that guy. Yeah. But I remember having a conversation with the landlord, and he said, I think you might like this other particular part of Connecticut where there's more of a community. There won't be a whole lot of people who look like you, but there's great public schools. It'll be great for your family. Why don't you give it a try? And I had a long conversation with my wife about it. And I don't know if we're going to be there forever, but we did have a conversation about, hey, it's not Brooklyn. And it's not Hell's Kitchen, it's not Manhattan. Yeah. But one of the things I told Bina is, I said, I don't think we can move with fear. Like, I want to be able to walk into any room and say, yeah, we belong here. You can check the resume, you can check our LinkedIn. Yeah, we should be here too. And there's part of me maybe in this stage, we won't be there forever, but there is a little bit of a defiance in it of like, I'm not going to preclude myself from being there. I'm not going to just stand out. Yeah. Yeah, I can move here.
Yeah.
we may not be there forever, but we're there. We've signed our lease at least for this until next June.
I'm praying.
And I just don't want to move in. I want to move the way I want to move and the way we want to move.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's like one of those things where it's like you want to prove that you can go and belong there, and then you realize like there's a reason.
Why would I?
Like, why the fuck am I here? Like,
Yeah.
this is what I'm hoping for you. As an older gentleman,
Sure.
I look at you and I think to myself, son, I hope you'll find great comfort there, and you'll look up and you'll say, fuck yeah, we belong here. Used to be a people like us would never belonged here. Now we belong here, and we have just enough power to get the fuck back to the city.
Out, yeah.
To get back to the city where there's culture and like a bunch of people who are not, bankers.
Look, we'll talk outside of the podcast. If you can find a great place with a yard, just that'll be great.
Yeah.
That's all I need.
You're awesome, dude. Thank you
Thanks,
for hanging out and talking. It's been I can't say enough about King's Jester. It's
Thanks, man.
Just fucking
And thanks for
fantastic.
coming to the Radio City shows, man. They were just surreal.
Must have been surreal.
It was
it
was awesome, man.
Like, dude sells out Radio City 6 shows, 3 nights.
Yeah, 5. It was wild.
I mean, it's
surreal.
crazy to see it. And I'll tell you the other thing about that I experienced was that I mean, this sounds like a ridiculous thing to say, but for you will laugh at this. I mean, I've been to a lot of shows, of various kinds.
Sure.
I've never been to a show certainly in that venue,
right?
And I don't think I've ever been to a show anywhere that wasn't. I mean, this kind of sound funny, but like Radio City Music Hall, I don't know, just the proportion of Indian Americans.
Oh wow!
Like just a large number. I mean, I know there are things that you could go to that would be like that are specialty shows, right?
Yeah.
But like to be at Radio City Music Hall, I'm not sure there had ever been that. It felt like about a third of your crowd must have been Indian American. I was like very
totally.
I've been to a lot of rap shows that have been 90% black, but like where do you see that many Indian Americans at an entertainment event other than a show for you? I can't think of where that would be.
I don't know.
Where would it be?
I don't know if Mindy Kaling has like a book signing or something.
But,
I don't know.
But you know what I'm saying?
No,
It's unusual.
Yeah.
I meant it was awesome
No,
because there's a certain crowd that
it was
shows
just
Radio City
surreal,
Music Hall.
yeah.
I mean, I remember seeing Chappelle there when he did this first comeback, and that was a more mixed race crowd than I'd probably ever seen at Radio City Music Hall. You should go on all black shows that are mostly black, or you go to shows that are mostly white. You don't see shows like 50-50. Chappelle was like 50-50. You're like, okay, I don't see that very often here. Yeah. And your show was like a third.
Wow.
You know, and I was like, that's interesting. Like, this is a different demographic mix than I think I've ever seen, certainly in this
It was
venue.
amazing, man.
It was awesome.
Yeah,
it's
really
awesome.
was.
It's awesome to see. I love it when you see some mix that you've never seen before. That's just cool. This is fucking great.
Thanks, man.
Anyway,
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time.
Appreciate you, man.
You're awesome.
Thank you, man. Cheers.